Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this ebook launch for Digitally Disruptive, Current Topics, Historical Perspectives. My name is Gideon Burton, and I am the instructor for a group of a dozen students who have put together this ebook over the last few weeks. And so we're going to take some time now and tell you about this ebook. And so we're first going to hear from two students who wrote in the progress section of our ebook. So our first student is Adam Burton, and Adam joins us from Colorado. And say hello, Adam.
Hello.
Hello. All right, go ahead.
Okay, well, my name is Adam Burton, and the chapter that I wrote in the ebook is called Move Backwards with the Internet. And the main thing I talk about is how the Internet compares to the printing press, and that the Internet has this infinite memory that allows false rumors and false ideas to persist with the people for a long time. Whereas with the printing press, one edition of books will replace the previous one. And so the medium has changed the way that these ideas are shared among the community at large. And I think it's great because I like being able to store stuff on the Internet, and I think that's great, but it also is interesting how it kind of affects the way that people think. And again, my chapter is Moving Backwards with the Internet.
Thank you, Adam. If you could go ahead and mute yourself. I just wanted to say, well, I'm trying not to be a camera hog, but in case any of these students, you can't hear them or we're having technical difficulties, they've all produced beautiful short videos introducing their topics, and you can also see the link to that in our show notes or directly below the YouTube broadcast window. So now or at a future point, if you'd like to hear each student introduce his or her topic, then go ahead and watch those on the playlist that we've provided for you there. Kristen.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Kristen Lindsay, and I wrote the chapter called Let's Not Disrupt Child Labor. And in that chapter, I argue that although you would expect the Internet to make crime and wrongdoing more transparent to the public, it actually creates more platforms for social ills to exist on, specifically child labor. And I talk about how this disrupts the mentality we have that society is progressing toward having better morals and ethics. I was interested in this topic after learning about the rise of child labor during the Industrial Revolution, and I also talk about that in my chapter. And I kind of wanted to discuss how child labor is not just an issue of our past, and then connect that to how it continues on new levels in the digital age. So that's my chapter, and that completes the progress section.
Hello. All four of us were in the Identities section, and we focused on how fashion, social Darwinism, violence, and other things affect identity and disrupt identity. My name is Lexi Hanshaw. I focused specifically on identity and how identity has shifted from a certain definition in the Enlightenment era, as well as how today we are often struggling with identity because of technology, because of our dual citizenship between now and then with new finds and advances in technology. My name is Lexi Hanshaw, and I wrote the chapter focusing on disrupting identities.
Hi, so my name is Haley Wigington, and the chapter I wrote is called Fashioning Your Identity, and I talk about how the role that fashion plays in society has changed with the digital age. It has become more of a way to express identity and less of a way to categorize people into social classes. And so that's my chapter, Fashioning Your Identity.
My name is Denise Tuerao, and my chapter is called Digital Identity Subjective to Social Darwinism. I want to start with a question. Why do you think there are so many catfish today? In the online environment, a catfish is a person who creates a fake identity. If our world is so globalized and diversified, why are there so many people pretending to be someone else on Facebook or other social media? That was the question I had in mind as I was writing my chapter. And interestingly, in my research, I was always led back to the same answer: having to fit in. During colonization, social Darwinism had an impact on identity. People had to fit in. They had to meet each criteria that was seen as the superior identity. And similarly, today, we have same effect of social Darwinism in the digital world. And that is what I expand on in my chapter.
Hi, my name is Taylor Quass, and my chapter in our ebook, Digitally Disruptive, is Blood in Our Eyes, How Violence Unites and Divides Our Identities. In this chapter, I discuss how violence as an aspect of identity helps unite and divide them, both socially and personally. And then I also go on to talk about how it is sanitized today, and also how it's prevalent, and we need to be mindful of it and use it as a tool instead of as something to be feared or else governed by. Now, I wrote this chapter because, well, I'm a gamer. I love playing games. I love playing them especially with my friends and my family. But the problem is, there's violence in some games and more violence in others. And so I was wondering how exactly the violence influences our identities. And my chapter is a result of that research. Again, my name is Taylor Quass, and my chapter is Blood in Our Eyes, How Violence Unites and Divides Our Identities.
Okay, we want to just pause the chapter introductions for just a second and re-welcome all of those who have joined us in our virtual meeting in the last few minutes. We've had minor technical issues, but we seem to have resolved those, and we thank you for helping us out in the chat box. I just wanted to recognize that we have a few people here. I recognize Nathan, Scott, and Will. You've been helping us out a little bit in the chat box, giving your comments and ideas, and we really appreciate that. And we also invite those of you who are joining now to introduce yourselves, give your name, where you're from, and then feel free to comment on the things that we're talking about in our chapter presentations. And so we'll continue with those just for the next few minutes.
My name is Acacia Woodbury, and Anthony and I are addressing digital issues with social institutions. So I will be addressing education, and he will be addressing the economy. There are a lot of different issues and different ways that the digital age has influenced our society, and specifically in education. One of the things that I noticed the big gap between school and what we can learn at home on our computer, that I don't think that gap needs to exist necessarily. There's a large quantity of information available on the internet, but especially there's an open context for dialogue that students can make use of when they're maybe developing their own content or sharing their own ideas, or even researching and finding additional resources for whatever subject that they happen to be studying. I've had a really diverse educational experience, and I've gone to a lot of schools and attended a cyber school, and I've noticed a difference when digital literacy is a part of my educational experience. Especially this class has been a really good example of that. And so that's what I address in my chapter, and it's called The Standard Fare, Establishing the Digital Classroom.
Hi there. Like Acacia said, my name is Anthony Johnson, and in our ebook, Digitally Disruptive, I wrote a chapter called Whack a Pirate, the economic game of digital piracy. Right now, digital piracy is one of the most controversial issues, besides being one of the most popular digital crimes in our age. So in my chapter, I discuss a little bit about what digital piracy is and how it came about, some of the reasons why it's like the pirate of the golden age, and also what we can do about the issue for the future. My reason for writing the chapter is, being an author, I'm a bit worried about some of the ways that digital piracy can and will affect the sales of all of my future books. And as such, I wrote this chapter with the hope that more people can be informed about the issue and start doing something to change it. So once again, my name is Anthony Johnson. I wrote a chapter called Whack a Pirate, the economic game of digital piracy, in our ebook, Digital Disruption. And now I'll present the next group.
Hello, I'm Mason Parks. This is Tiana Cole. We're in the section The Crowd 2.0, which talks about the way that the crowd has new possibilities, new things they can do here in this digital age. I talk a little bit about the way it can influence the democratic system. She talks about other projects like the Bible translation. So my chapter mainly focuses on the way that we can use crowdsourcing to create a new disruption in the digital age. Democracy was a huge disruption during the Age of Enlightenment, and it really changed the way things worked. And today we have the possibility to reach never before seen levels of crowd participation to revolutionize the democratic system. And I think this can combat a lot of major problems in the world's political systems, especially here in this country. So that's my chapter. It's called Democracy 2.0, and hope you enjoy it.
Okay, hi, I'm Tiana Cole, like we said, and my chapter is called Reformation 2.0. And in there I talk about how the participatory culture of Web 2.0 has transformed the crowd. The way that we see the crowd has been disrupted from just seeing them as spectators and transforming them into creators. And so in this digital age, we have a lot more opportunity to collaborate through online collaboration and crowdsourcing. And as Mason said, I talk a lot about Bible translation because in the Reformation period, Martin Luther translated the Bible from Latin into German. And while he was just one man, today in the digital age, we are using crowdsourcing techniques to make versions of the Bible, different translations of the Bible in languages where before it didn't really exist. So yeah, in my chapter I look at a lot of how that is playing out because I study linguistics and that was interesting to me. So I'd love to talk to you about it. Again, my name is Tiana Cole, and my chapter is Reformation 2.0.
Okay, my name is Ben Snow. This is Mindy Burton. Our section was on the art and creativity in the digital world. So, like I said, we talked about art. My claim in my chapter in the book, Digitally Disruptive. So my chapter's title is Artistic Expression in the Digital World. And the main point of that chapter is that we live in a world of changing arts. As a society, we have abandoned certain artistic traditions, but at the same time, we've gained many added benefits in terms of production, in terms of sharing and enjoying the arts. These artistic shifts, however, have led to a lot of heated debate in the past over the legitimacy of the new art, and they also can be controversial in the world today. We live in a world of instant access to different types of media, entertainment, and arts, and it's important that we learn to recognize and appreciate the important role that technology plays in our expanding and changing view of the arts. So like I said, my name is Ben Snow. My chapter is entitled Artistic Expression in the Digital World.
Hello, my name is Mindy Burton, and they saved the best for last, just saying. So, my chapter is called Patrons of the Digital Renaissance. And right now in the digital age, we have a potential new renaissance, which I'm calling the digital renaissance. And we have the need, though, for someone to kind of guide our artists. Back in the Renaissance, we had patrons, and they not only provided money, but they also provided a structure for people to create art. Michelangelo, for example, he worked on the Sistine Chapel for 4 years, and he had housing to live in. Leonardo also lived with the Medici family for 7 years. And in today's age, like I personally am a musician. My husband, who's watching, I think, he's a drummer. And we know what it's like to be in a band, and we're so creative, but we need someone to kind of hone in that creativity and just be the organizer. And so I'm excited to discuss more about digital patrons and how we can see that today. Back to you.
Turn back to Adam.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Hopefully I don't have a horrible echo. So I've been looking at the chat while we're talking, and something that's come up, a couple of things, is the long tail. somebody made some comments on something that I said about whether or not ideas that are posted on the internet are any weaker than ideas that are printed in physical books. And I mean, you can read my comment there, but it was interesting because people kept talking and they moved on to other things and started talking about the long tail, which basically says now that there is the internet, anybody can get any sort of business from anywhere, and so we don't have to rely just on big businesses. And so it kind of had to deal with that a little bit, and I thought that was kind of the interesting start to a conversation. So does anybody have any ideas on how this long tail, how this access to tons of different producers and companies rather than just a few big names, how that might be messing with our culture or messing with our progress or any other topic we've talked about? Go ahead and leave your comments if you're not in the video, but I open this up to the students here so that we can kind of have that conversation.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a quick comment about what Adam said. Part of my chapter in this ebook discusses a bit about the long tail and how digital piracy actually is not only a product of the long tail, but also how it's actually destroying the long tail as well. As the long tail continues to grow and offer more and more products, we who love to experiment and see and watch everything there is to see are starting to take illegal means in order to experience everything. And the reality is right now, if you want to see everything on the long tail, you won't be able to afford it. You're probably going to have to break a few laws to do it. And as such, it's causing the problem that some of these people in the long tail who normally would make a little bit of money are now not making anything because of digital piracy, and the long tail is actually decreasing now because of it. Now, this issue is up to debate, and we have a few students who would probably say something against that, so I'm going to give the time over to Mindy to make a comment.
So I just wanted to rebuttal a little bit with the long tail because there's negative and positive things, and one of the things that I talk about is how the long tail has given amateurs the ability to make it in the world. Because let's take someone like Taylor Swift. I almost called her Taylor Swift. Anyway, Taylor Swift, she has record labels that are backing her up, and she can sell albums to the masses. But then take a smaller, not younger, but a smaller band. They could sell one song and they can make it a decent amount of money off of it. Maybe they can get licensed by a TV show. And I've seen that happen with people that I know. So the long tail's enabled that because of the digital tools out there. That's how we were able to see more smaller artists.
Okay, I would like to respond to a comment that was made by Russ, and in doing so, my comments will reflect a little bit of what Mindy and Anthony have just said. The comment was, what mediums or what artistic mediums have been most affected by advances in technology? And in my opinion, one of the ones that has been most greatly affected is that of music. With the long tail, we have obscure artists who are able to gain popularity and produce their music and advertise it and show it to many people across the world. They're no longer limited to the limits of CDs or the radio, but through different social mediums they can advertise and show their work. And so I think the rise of the amateur artist through that opportunity, through the advancing technology, has been one of the forms that has been most greatly affected by advances in technology.
Okay, so just to kind of connect the long tail to my topic, which was child labor, it's kind of one of the more negative things about it is that today we have online shopping sites, which people, I mean, it hasn't been around for that long, and so having all these like smaller name brands out all over the internet, we don't really know where all these companies are getting their products from. Some of them could be getting them from child workers from foreign countries. So in my chapter I kind of talk about how that poses a problem of bringing new ways for us to support child labor by purchasing things online, even though we don't know where they're coming from, what country they're coming from, and how they're being made. And that's one of the negative aspects of the long tail.
Okay, speaking about the long tail and also answering some of the questions on the comments. In my book, I kind of talk about how the long tail has made it possible for more niche groups to get material and products. For example, a fangirl is someone who's like really into like popular literature. My niece considers herself a fangirl, and she can find clothing to fit her needs, which is something that is kind of a group that, for me, I had never heard of it before she became one. But there are many, many platforms online for her to find clothing. There are bloggers who blog specifically about that kind of fashion. There are apps that she can look at, and that is something that wouldn't have happened like even 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so the long tail has created the ability for people with different and various interests be able to buy and purchase clothing that will help them represent their identity and help people to see them the way they want to be seen. So that's my input on the long tail and fashion.
Okay, so my chapter focused mainly on the way all of this kind of stuff could tie back into like a political thing. So I was really thinking about the way this long tail could affect the way we look at the political system. A lot of times we look at just the two parties, and that's all we see. And I think through the internet, through this new digital age, we can see more than just the main two parties. It's like they've been saying about fashion or art. I mean, you don't have to listen to Taylor Swift because it's the only thing on the radio. You don't have to buy what they're selling in the store because that's all you can find. I mean, today you can go out and find whatever you want. I think that same kind of thing isn't always available in the political arena. I think a lot of the times this is a disruption that needs to happen. The political system kind of needs to follow that the way businesses have gone.
Thank you, Mason. I'm also going to talk. I also want to talk a little bit about or touch on how the long tail affects like the violence, whatever, because I noticed some of the comments on the chat. Again, I don't discuss about how violence is good or bad. I don't say anything about that whatsoever. At least I try not to. Regardless of that, though, I talk about how it's more used to unite or divide people, unite or divide themselves, their identities, their self-images. And in this case, like what is it Kristen? Did you read? No, Haley brought up about how like fangirls or fanboys or whatever, fandoms is another term for some of them. There are groups that are generated about topics or events or things that have a violent aspect to them in one way or another. An example of this is like Star Wars, Naruto, or I don't know, Game of Thrones, for example. All these things. There are some violent aspects to them, but that doesn't necessarily make the people violent. It's just an aspect. It's a tool. It's another catalyst to progress a story. And some of these things, not very many people are fans of. I don't know how many of you have heard of a comic or an anime or manga in Japan called Soul Eater, but there are people online who like it, and they go online. They can form fan groups, and the internet facilitates this society online. It helps people form identities from it. Like, I can identify myself with the games that I play and meet other people who enjoy playing those games and interact with them and say, yeah, I play this game. Or if I were on this game, I'd pick this. I can make who I am based off of those kind of things.
Okay, so I just wanted to change gears a little bit by linking back to something that Ben brought up earlier about the rise of the amateur. And in the chat stream, we were talking about, well, Nathan brought up, how do you, with a crowd, how do you basically have a gatekeeper? How do you make sure that things are good? And in my chapter, I talk a little bit about how having checks and balances, basically checking, will kind of minimize that and make it more quality, more standard. And that's hard, especially when the project's really big. And in terms of how it relates to history, it's a lot easier if you only have one person working on something because you only have your perspective to look at. But with the wider opinions that you can get from the crowd and wider abilities, I guess, contributed to your project, it makes that checking necessary, but it can also improve the quality of the product. So something to be said for the rise of the amateur.
I just wanted to say, someone asked how politicians can use digital tools these days. Snapchat just hired an ex-CNN reporter who is going to be this fall, and they hired a bunch of like interns and stuff like that. But Snapchat will be using it to do political stuff, and Twitter is another really good way that people use, like reporters, things like that. Those are just really cool tools that we can use these days. I'm not very articulate, so maybe.
I just actually saw a question on the Google page. Again, there is a Google page that if you cannot write comments on the YouTube page, that you can write comments on. There is a link to it off the Google Plus page. This one is how does violence affect political identities? Well, if you look throughout history, countries have united themselves or divided themselves by it. Like Germany's rising up, and during the World War II, and so people formed on one side. They formed basically teams. There was the Axis, and then there was the Allies. Again, sometimes, and people were upset later with Germans and blamed them for something that happened a long time ago. Again, it was more what was done that was violent that affected them, and not always the violence themselves. I mean, some people generations later still reflect and remember, and sometimes say, well, no, this person's German, so this, even though that action is long said and done. Oh, I hope that answers your question.
I just want to pipe in for a second. We still have about 20 minutes left in our event here, and so part of what I think would be interesting here would be for the students to talk a little bit about their process of discovering these issues. How is it that going into history helped them have new eyes for some of these contemporary digital issues? What might have been different if they hadn't thought of this in historical terms? And then it'd be interesting also if any of the students want to talk about the tools that we used and what we learned about by using the new communications tools and the digital literacy that we gained along the way. Would anyone like to comment on that?
Part of my process was learning about R.E.B. Crompton in the 21st century. That's not a name that we normally hear in our history books, but something that he did near the beginning of the 21st century was he began talking about standardization in his field, and that was what really led me to think of how standardizing things helps them have a big impact, which is one of the main subjects in my chapter, that standardizing digital tools actually is what will make the biggest difference, because for Crompton, he was an electrical engineer, and before he started making plans for measurements or plans to be regulated in the industry and made the same between different manufacturers, people were still able to communicate to a certain extent and to build and to do things, but the efficiency of it made a really big difference. And so that was what really affected the way that I viewed how big of an influence standardizing something could have, especially with digital tools, which was my subject.
I was interested in writing about the issue of identity because I personally question my identity in my life. In this class, I studied colonization in the 20th century, and I'm from Tahiti, and I've experienced the effect of French colonization, and I saw the French influence and French culture being imposed onto us so much that we've progressively been losing our own culture and language and basically our own identity. But now with the digital influence today, we're seeing our culture coming back. And I think that is because we are in a globalized world now, and because of that exchange of cultures, people are more open to cultural differences.
Before you get up, I'm going to just squeeze in here a little bit. Yeah. Hi. ¿Cómo ça va?
Ça va.
I wanted to ask your opinion about something. some people have thought of the internet as sort of acting like an empire from days of old, you know, and an empire can be very controlling. You've seen the negative influences, perhaps, of European colonization in your home country. Do you think the internet is acting like an empire? Are we just repeating the same problems we saw in the 19th century?
Well, I do see it in my research. Like I said, I did find an effect of social Darwinism in the digital world in a way that the crowd generally sets online social standards, and that separates the adaptable people who can adapt to the constant change of those online social standards, and the masses, those who can, and they end up being progressively suppressed, just like it happened during colonization. Colonization was justified by social Darwinism, and it was basically an attempt to create a unified and high culture or identity. And this is what is happening in the digital world.
Okay, so as we were studying history in this class, I really was interested in looking into the different types of fashion that people were wearing in those times. Not just because I think that, because I like fashion, but also because I think it's a really good insight into the social values of the different societies. I think it gives you a really big insight into what they think is important and what their culture is like. And so when I was studying about the 20th century and the flapper age in the 1920s, it was interesting to see how people were really categorized based on their ability to attain like the popular trend of the time. And that made me think of how lucky I am to be living in this time when I'm not put into those same sort of categories, but I have the ability and the freedom to choose things that I want to wear in order to create my identity. And so that's kind of how I came about the process of writing my chapter.
So when I started writing my chapter, I first was like all gung-ho, like the digital age is killing creativity. Because that's how I feel, because I mean I've been seeing in our comments about traditional art and things like that, and I totally am on the, I think that it takes a trained artist and there's just like this artistic eye, but then I started realizing that's all subjective and that's really hard to argue, but it really is, like, it is subjective. But as I kind of developed my chapter, I started realizing when we look back into the past, like who really fueled the Renaissance, and it's a relationship between artist and patron. And like I said when I introduced my chapter, the artists needed like a structure, and I think we still need that today, and we can see that structure in many different ways, and we still need patrons too, and this is kind of just as I was developing everything. So I just wanted to tell you what perhaps a patron of today looks like. And we can see that through Kickstarters, crowdfunding, things like that. There's a musician named Amanda Palmer who has used crowdfunding sources very well. She's done it on Kickstarter. I can't remember the other. Patreon is a new one, but she's done multiple Kickstarter type pages. But if you look up Amanda Palmer, she had 30,000 backers for her Kickstarter, and I think she raised, I want to say like $1.5 million or something. So we see that there's people that want to support the smaller musician. They want to do it. They just don't know how. So I encourage you to look up Patreon. If you see someone that's ever doing like a Kickstarter, just give them $1, give them $2, however much you can spare, because I think that is how we can keep fueling and like create beautiful art these days.
So there was a question that was shared, not on the comments, that I wanted to address regarding my chapter. Johanna Hardy asked a question, just what I meant by identities are disruptive in our day today. In my chapter, I go and I explore our time where so much of who we are is represented online versus in person, and how people demonstrate and share who they are online, and when they see others, they often talk about what they posted or what they shared via the internet. And there's so many different avenues that people go down to share and to advertise and to explain who they feel they are. And so in many ways it can be disruptive because that can be falsely shared. It can be, people can share things about others that may not be true. And identities can shatter and crumble in the time and in the way that we talk about others, ourselves, and even the world around us. Something I wanted to touch on as well as I have this time is how the class went with writing our chapters and everything. It was an evolution of work and progress and study. And I first was talking about something called changes of reference, changing frames of reference specifically, and how time and the glasses that we may look through change and evolve. An example I used was Martin Luther and how Copernicus, how Copernicus had studied and learned and saw a new route to take, which he did, and how others fought back and said no, even though they may have accepted a new frame of reference in a different subject. And how today we see through many different frames and are overlapping our views. You could say we're putting on 4 different sunglasses to look at one specific time. And my chapter talks more about that and the problems and the struggles that we may have and how we should have moderation in those things. But I encourage you to look back and look at that chapter.
So discussing kind of the history, the way we looked at history, I just kind of thought it was something interesting because what I feel like I've learned a little bit is that a lot of the things that are happening in the digital age are kind of a continuation of subtle but very important themes that have been happening throughout history. I mean, Lexi just mentioned the way identities have been changing, how before people's identities were basically determined by, you know, where they were born, and where you were born, like that was your identity, you couldn't change that. But as other people have said, now you can have your own identity, you can be a fanboy, a fangirl, and you can just decide that you don't want to be anything like the people you're born around, you can be somebody else. Or the way that she mentioned the changing frames of reference, the different sunglasses that we could put on to look at issues. So really I think that that's something that I've learned a lot about, is how history helps us to really understand the importance of the changes that are happening in our digital age. Like, we can't look at these as isolated incidents. We have to look at them as they compare or contrast with the broader changes that have been happening over hundreds of years.
I just wanted to spend a minute here talking briefly about the ebook itself. I'm going to share the screen so you can see where you can actually get our ebook. And this is on leanpub.com. And I wanted to mention this as a particularly interesting platform. The way knowledge works in the digital age is different than how it has traditionally. When you're coming at things from the point of view of print, your ideas have to be completely finished, meaning both completed and perfected, before they can be circulated. But that's not so in the digital age. It's so easy to spread our ideas that we can spread them productively even when they are in an infant stage. And so this very platform is devoted to this concept of release early and often, which came from open source software, and they've recast it as publish early and often. And I believe in this very much, because if you put together some cogent thoughts, even though you haven't, written the book on something in a kind of definitive way from, say, the 20th century, you put together something that others can build upon. So let me quit screen sharing here. And so my point is that as our students have published this book, they're not professional scholars, but they've said things, they've crystallized things that can help move the conversation forward and things that we can build on. We kind of joked earlier in the semester, you're probably familiar with Newton's famous phrase that, you know, if he was able to see further than others, it was because he was standing on the shoulders of giants. Well, someone in the class rephrased this as, how did that person rephrase it?
Follow the Twitter account.
It doesn't matter whether you're a giant or a pygmy, someone can stand on you.
Doesn't matter whether you're a giant or a pygmy, someone can stand on you. So this is a way of being modest about the ebook that we've created. It's not professional. It's not been peer-reviewed by scholars, but it is something that we can stand on. It's a point at which we can reflect on these issues productively and hopefully inspire people like you, our audience, and hopefully our readers, to think further on these issues. So I'm very glad that we've made the effort as amateurs, in the true sense of the word, both non-professionals and lovers, people who love the ideas and the topics, that we've been willing to share them, and I just am proud of my students for their willingness to go along with this experiment. It took no small amount of learning curve with a variety of different tools that we were using. We did drafts and published them on a wiki. They had to learn how to use wikis. We were using Google Plus all the time to get feedback. We used Google Hangouts, and we're able to get feedback from people beyond our university. It was very helpful. And now we're doing this webinar through a Google Hangout on air. We have time for just a few final thoughts or questions. Would anyone like to get another chance in front of the camera, or will I just blather on?
There's been a lot
discussed
about.
There is something I would like to say if I can.
Sure. Go ahead, Adam.
Earlier, first off, I want to fess up. I accidentally got the name of our book backwards. We've switched it a couple times, so anyway, it's Digitally Disruptive. But earlier in the conversation, we were talking about whether disruption is good or bad, and so it's just kind of an interesting question. There's so many things that happen throughout history just because humans are so weird, and we're constantly trying to fix things or mess with things, and so the status quo is always getting upended, and I think that among all the things that we've been talking about, I think that I would hazard a guess to say that most of the things we talk about are disruptive in a good way. Like we are trying to improve our lives, and the disruption happens because of old pirates, because they're trying to improve their lives for themselves, or I don't know, that's the most vivid example I could think of, but I think that in general disruption is a good thing. Feel free to disagree with me, but that's what I take away from it.
Yeah, and I just want to go along with what Adam was saying, in part that what can actually be bad or disruptive at one moment can actually lead to something better. A lot of my chapter, I discussed the history of the current digital pirate and the old golden age pirate back in the 1700s. Now, for example, the golden age pirate, these were lawbreakers, they were attacking people, robbing people. That's bad. Well, one cool thing the pirates did, though, is that they actually formed their own nation in the Bahamas, a republic of pirates. And 80 years after, a little place called United States was formed, and in their United States Constitution, parts of it was taken by the rules that was used in this pirate republic. Now, in modern days, for example, digital pirates are a bad thing, they're robbing. Some statistics are saying that they're causing an upwards of 750,000 jobs lost per year. At the same time, iTunes, Netflix are both programs that we're currently using that were created in part to combat piracy, to give people a way to enjoy their products without having to break a law.
Just wanted to say that I think we are evidence of the rise of amateurs that we have today. We, as students, wrote an ebook in just within the spring term, which is such a short term, but we invested so much of ourselves in working in our chapter. We're not professionals, but we did so much research, and we learned so much in this class with Dr. Burton. that I think our ebook is very interesting. It's very interesting how we connected today, the digital age, with different periods of time, different main changes that occurred throughout history. I think you'd like the book.
Thanks for that promotion. And you can get it for a 100% discount if you get it today or at any point in the future. So thanks so much for joining us for this webinar. I could see from the chat stream that a number of really interesting issues were brought up. And we measure the success of what we've done in part by the quality of the conversations that we generate. And that has to do both with the present hour we've spent together and also with the ebook that we've created. And hopefully that you and other readers in the future will benefit from what we've written and take it further than we have. So we'll sign off for now, and thanks very much. And be sure to click the link in the show notes so that you can get your free copy of Digitally Disruptive, Current Topics, Historical Perspectives. Thanks very much.
Clap.
Clap.